In the last lesson, we saw how the Pythagorean theorem can be used to work out if a triangle is a right triangle or not, based simply on the lengths of the three sides. We're going to look at a slightly different problem today. What happens if we know that the triangle is a right triangle? Well, what can we do with it? Well, because we know a relationship between the lengths of the three sides, we can actually work out the length of one from the other two. If we know that a triangle is a right triangle, and we know the lengths of two sides, we can find the length of the other side using the Pythagorean theorem. Now, don't forget that C is always assigned to the length of the hypotenuse, and that A and B are assigned to the other two sides called legs. Now, we should always check after we've done our calculations that the hypotenuse really is the longer side, because if it doesn't work out that way, then we've made some sort of mistake along the line. Let's look at examples of how we do this. So the question asks us to find the length x in each triangle. Now we know that the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, applies because each of these are right triangles. The little square corner indicates that this is a right angle. So if we're going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared, we need to know which sides are a, b, and c. Now c is the hypotenuse, and previously we chose the longest side to be the hypotenuse. But if this length is x, we don't know what that is yet. So it could be the longest side, or it might not be. Well, remember, there's another way to tell which side is the hypotenuse. It's the two legs that are adjacent or next to our right angle, and the hypotenuse, which isn't. This side here doesn't touch the right angle, so that has to be C. The other two sides are A and B, and we can label them in whichever order we want. So let's substitute into our equation from the Pythagorean theorem the values from our triangle. So A is 5, B is 8, and C is x. Now we can evaluate this expression here on the left-hand side. So 25 plus 64 is equal to x squared, and that is 89. So x squared equals 89. Now, if we want to work out what x is, as in what number do we square to get 89, then we can use a square root for that. So x is the square root of 89. Don't forget that the square root is the inverse operation of a square, so it can be used to undo that. Well, the square root of 89, now we're going to have to be approximate here, because 89 is not a perfect square, but that is 9.43, approximately, to two decimal places. And to get our units, we can see the units that we used for our lengths in the original triangle, which were meters. So we have those same units here. Okay, for the next triangle, we have three sides again. Remember, C has to be the hypotenuse, so the side not touching the right angle is the 57 miles across the top here. And then the other two sides are our A and B. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We know this is true because this is a right triangle, and the Pythagorean theorem tells us so. A is x, b is 48, and c is 57. Now we can evaluate both of these squares, not the x squared, but 48 squared is 2,304, And 57 squared is 3,249. Now to work out x squared, we'll need to subtract 2,304 from both sides. So 3,249, take 2,304, works out to be 945. To undo our squared, we square root, because that is the inverse operation, and we get 30.7 approximately, and our units will be miles. For the next question, remember we need to work out which side is the hypotenuse, which doesn't touch the right angle, so this will be the side labelled 144. So that's our C, and then this can be A, and this can be B. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Again, we know this is true because this is a right angle, so this is a right triangle. This means that x squared plus 112 squared equals 144 squared. This works out to be that we have x squared plus 12,544 is equal to 20,736. To get x squared, we can subtract the 12,544 from both sides. So x squared equals 20736. Take 12544, which is 8192. So x is the square root of that number, which works out to be 90.5 millimeters. Now we have one more example problem here, and it's a word problem. Now I know that these are always daunting, but with these type of problems, the first step you want to try and do is draw a picture of the scenario. Because when you do that, hopefully what we'll find is there's a right triangle somewhere hidden within these words. And if there is, then we can just do exactly what we've just done in order to solve it. So this tells us that a ship sails 100 miles north from its dock and then turns east and sails 150 miles. So if we imagine that, we have our starting point here as our dock, and the ship sails north. So let's say it sails here, and that is said to be a 100 miles. And then our ship turns east and sails a further 150 miles. I'm not drawing this to scale, but I am drawing it using a ruler to make it as neat as possible. So this is our new location for our ship. Now, remember how I said there has to be a right triangle hiding somewhere in this question for us to use the Pythagorean theorem? Well, firstly, where the right angle is hiding is where it tells us we were sailing north and then we turn to the east. That means these two directions are 90 degrees apart. So there's our right angle. Now our right triangle comes from the fact that the question wants to know the distance that the ship is from the dock. So if we connect these 2 points, and I'm going to use a dashed line here, because the ship hasn't really sailed along this line. We're just measuring an imaginary path here, but for how far the ship is from the dock directly. Now this is a quantity we don't know, so I'm going to label this as D because it's a distance. So let's take the same approach now because we have our right triangle. So let's call, well, this will be our hypotenuse. So this is both D and it's also C. This one here can be A, and this one here can be B. So we know that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That means for this particular triangle, 100 squared plus 150 squared equals D squared, where D is our distance. Now 100 squared is 10,000. And 150 squared is 22,500. And this equals D squared. Add those two together and we get 32,500. So, if that's D squared, D is the square root of that number, 32,500. And this will be approximately 180.23, with the units being miles.